Welcome to Mighty Married Moms. Join us at our kitchen table twice a week as the Mighty Married Moms, Debbie, Linda, Wendy, invite spectacular guests to weigh in on staying sexy, vibrant, and healthy, building marriages with soul-satisfying connection, raising happy, healthy, successful kids. Conversations with Mighty Married Moms will bring you closer to the life you really want. Episode 41.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Mighty Married Moms. My name is Wendy Williams, and hopefully you found us either by going to mightymarriedmoms.com or through iTunes. And today we're very happy to have a wonderful guest with us today, someone I can't call a personal friend, and someone who is an author, an accomplished author. I'd like to introduce you to Reverend Dr. Garrett Smith. He's the author of Comfortably Jewish, Practical Ways to Enjoy Your Family Heritage, and the founder of Celebrate Life, a ministry of counseling and celebrating sacred occasions for Jewish interfaith marriages. He's also the director of spiritual formation and outreach at Newton Presbyterian Church in Massachusetts. He lives in Watertown, Massachusetts with his lovely wife and 3 children. Welcome, Garrett.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, great to have you. Yeah. And, one of the things that struck me about having you join us today is how often people come together in a marriage and try to raise a family with very differing backgrounds, either culturally, religiously, all sorts of things.
Economically.
Right.
Yeah.
Poses a lot of different challenges. And like I said, you and I have known each other a while, and I really appreciate your sensibility and how you come at things in a very practical way and a very compassionate, kind-hearted way. So I was looking forward to having you join us and kind of unpack a little bit on the matters of joining families with differing ways of styles or ways of being. But first, why don't you give us an idea of how you grew up a little bit and how you ended up being a reverend doctor and writing these books.
Oh, my goodness, the spiel. I didn't realize that one.
A little bit, just a little bit.
A little spiel. I was raised in a Jewish home, although my mom was Mormon, my dad was Jewish. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, as a result, no one came to their marriage. Their actual wedding, I mean.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Oh, everybody was mad at them, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
On both sides. And it's funny, my dad insisted that we be raised Jewish. And people would say, well, why would you, if it's so important to you, why would you marry someone who wasn't Jewish? But that's part of like some of the mystery of the nature of, we were talking earlier about identity and why, he couldn't imagine having kids who were different than him.
Interesting.
Raising kids that weren't Jewish, but the idea of marrying one and, breaking and doing that taboo really in the Jewish community, especially at that time. Right. It's not much of a taboo today with probably half the Jewish community intermarrying, but back then it was a real taboo. But I was raised in Jewish culture, and for me it was all cultural. There wasn't traditions, community; those things were all really important. It had nothing to do with God, if that makes sense. And it wasn't really till my early 20s that I kind of dropped out of culture. I went off to the Far East for a couple of years. Ended up in even a Buddhist monastery for a while. And for me, it was like, just kind of experimenting with life. And then I had this crazy thing happen to me in Israel, and I suddenly went from an atheist to a believer in God and a believer in Jesus, and much to the shock of about all of my friends and family.
Yeah, that's a big
Never met someone who believed in Jesus, and suddenly I'm the religious fanatic of the family. and so now, as you know, I'm a pastor now, but a lot of it for me was trying to solve this issue because culturally I'm Jewish, and that's who I am, those things I care. I feel like a fish out of water when I'm in church. And so I thought, how do I want my kids to understand that? Because for me, the Jewish traditions are the ones that mean something to me. They carry a lot of resonance. And how do I separate out the idea of their culture, their identity, and what we believe in our faith? And actually, in some ways, it works better in church, because I find that even in church, people get confused as to what's culture and what's their real faith. The real sort of the transforming relationship.
Sure.
And
sure.
And for me, it's very natural because I'm not of that culture, if that makes sense. And so anyway, that's part of where my work, and I became naturally working with these couples that have these differences because I'm able to translate for them and understand it, because in some ways it's hard, it's all a big mix, culture, family, identity, faith, religion, all can smash together, and couples don't actually understand what's happening inside of them and what are the dynamics going on. And so being able to draw these things out is one of the things I do when I work with couples. And particularly, I like to work a lot with rites of passage, around weddings and things like that, because couples don't know, who do we get to help this? We want this to be kind of, meaningful and sacred, but we don't want it to be Jewish. We don't want it to be, whatever else, Christian or whatever else they wanted. How do we blend these things? How do we deal with our families and that kind of
Yeah.
Probably more than one.
And you work with couples as in a pastoral way, or I think you have a practice in family therapy, or am I got that right?
Well, I have a doctorate of ministry in marriage and family counseling.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm a jack of all trades. I'm a pastor. I work with these kind of rites of passage, helping these couples. Actually, I perform the weddings and help them walk through the process of getting there. Counseling them before, helping them prepare for their family life on the backside, and actually performing the ceremonies, and also with baby namings as well, which is brisses or baby namings in the Jewish community. I don't actually do the cut, help the ceremonial piece afterwards, and then also counseling with couples who have conflict in these areas.
Oh, great. Okay. Wonderful. So that kind of all that rich experience led to a book.
Yeah, the book was really
yeah, hold it up. Do you have it?
No, my Comfortably Jewish book.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was for me trying to figure out how do I think about these issues? How do I think about culture? How would I help my kids have a sense of Jewish identity? Because I think it's really critical. It's who they are. But how would they experience it without necessarily being highly involved in the Jewish community or necessarily practicing Judaism in that sense? Mm-hmm. And so I've been thinking about it for 20 years. And so then I, had some time off for a few months and I wrote a book about it. And so it's really how you can, in many ways, how in a very practical way you can do things with your family to give your kids a sense of experience and identity. For instance, I kind of break it down going, there are religious pieces, your sort of, traditions and holidays, and here's what they mean, and here's practical ways you can do them in your family. But it's also, when it comes to being Jewish, is also about the history of the people, understanding that. Right. It's about ethics, the way people interact with one another. It's about language. It's about food. You can't understand Jewishness at all unless you go to a Jewish deli and hear people yell at each other, and you try a bunch of foods that kind of smell like cat food. You need.
It's all part of it.
Chopped liver. It's great.
Right.
So these things are, but I want them to experience that. Here, try these different foods, and you like that, and you realize. I kind of liken it to saying, I play guitar really poorly, but when I walk into a music store, I feel like I still kind of know what's going on. Because I play some guitar, I can pick up an instrument, I can look at things, and I kind of feel comfortable, even though I'm not this great musician.
So you're not quite fluent, but you're familiar. You're not quite fluent, but you're familiar.
Yeah, and I think for me, the book was helping, interfaith families or where they were, having the kids be able to walk into the Jewish world and feel like I'm a part of it. I know what's going on in here. Right. I may not be this hardcore person in the middle of it, but it's not foreign to me.
Right.
So it's helping them learn to play guitar poorly in these different worlds.
There you go. Yeah. What a great goal.
Yeah.
But I think the same principles work if it was, a couple, if they were Armenian or Greek, or if they were, whatever sort of cultural traditions, or it could be even, that's not something strange like that, Midwestern. But you're trying to, even though if you're going to marry, if you're going to decide to go marry into the, someone who's Jewish or someone who's from a very different culture, you want to kind of think about your own culture and your family's culture and think about, how do my kids experience the best of that? How can they get a taste for it where it doesn't feel like it's a foreign land when they're with their cousins? And they understand their dad's world. They understand their mom's world. And in some ways, ultimately, I think the kids can become really good cultural translators, which is great in a multicultural world, that they're able to move in and out of culture and tradition. They're able to value things. They're able to, because sometimes people are so wrapped up in expectations, wrapped up in what they think should be happening. And I think a lot of these kids in these situations become much more pliable.
That's a great word. That's a great word. Able to really thrive given a multitude of environments. Able to find something to connect with.
So many of these couples assume that they're going to be, in some ways, disadvantaging their kids or hurting them in some ways. And I actually say, you could actually turn it around and actually really take a proactive approach to having kids who really value these things and being able to, actually move in a lot of cultures. And today's a multicultural world, so it's actually a really important skill to have.
Yeah.
To
be able to
how old are your kids right now, Garrett?
10, 9, and 5.
Okay, so in about 10 years, I would love to have you ask them, how did you feel about this, betwixt and between, and how do you feel about it now? And, but I would actually love to have you kind of unpack that word identity a little bit more for us. How does one find one's identity? How does it change over time? What are the influencing factors when it comes to identification? And what's the positive and maybe even the negatives for saying, this is how I identify myself or my group, or this is who I am and who I belong to.
Put a stake in the ground.
Yeah. It's a great question and a huge question. So
yeah, I know.
PhD kind of question. And I think it is a really...
2 master's degrees, so I'm sorry. There you go.
Well, I tend to break it down and say, in some ways, to see it in its pure form, to me, is an easier way. You think about someone who comes from a very monocultural situation. You're in a village, and there's a language, there's holidays, there's traditions, and a child grows up in there, and they have a sense of, this is who I am. I'm one of these people. This is what my life looks like. These are the expectations for it. These are my the kind of choices and things I'm going to do in my life. This is how I relate to my kids. This is how I relate to my friends. And so there's a sense of there's security in that, and they don't run around. And I say that because we move into our culture now, and I don't think people have a strong sense of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a comfort in that. And so they run around going, it's vocationally. Vocation becomes my identity. Therefore, how well I do in my vocation is how well I am as a person. Or it's,
yes.
I don't want to get into the sexuality stuff, but what's interesting is all the identity language that's thrown into it that 50 years ago was never part of that language. But a lot of it's just because in a multicultural world, identity people are searching for. The kids run in and they become goth or something like that. But it's an identity quest. Yeah. Am I one of the smart kids? Am I an athlete? Am I this or am I that? And a lot of that's, I think, the results as we come into this multicultural world where people are trying to figure out who they are and the natural way in which they figure out who they were and what's expected of them and the kind of decisions they're going to make isn't there anymore. And so I actually think there's a real value in trying to give your children stronger senses of identity. And you mentioned, that's why also, religions often played a huge cultural identity piece along with the faith piece. And now it's actually kind of gotten confused. Sometimes like the evangelical world I know very well, and they kind of in many ways strip out the culture piece, but they don't realize that actually they may do well at the faith piece. A lot of kids are wondering about who I am and what's expected of me, and there's a lot of insecurity in that. There's a lot of sense of, we have in our culture now, we have so many choices. And people are overwhelmed by those choices, and there used to be far less choices. I know I've kind of gone afield of the identity thing, but I see it as a big piece of all that, and people struggling to say who they are. And that's one reason why I go to these couples. I say you need to think. You're not going to be able to determine how your kids think about themselves, but you need to take a proactive decision as to how you want to help them get there.
Right.
Especially if you're. What's interesting? There was a study at USC. Somebody did a PhD on homogenous Jewish couples versus, heterogeneous ones that are different, and they said which kids had a higher higher sense of identity formation. I think they used Erickson's scale, of identity formation. And their hypothesis was that the homogenous Jewish couples their kids would have a higher identity scale. And they found the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, which is interesting. And what they found is that the interfaith couples were forced to take active approaches. The kids were forced to ask questions about who they were and why they were doing things and what's dad's world, what's mom's world. Well, oftentimes the homogenous ones, at least growing up, Jewish culture is weird because you're kind of like, you're white, English speaking, you're different, yet you're the same. It's a really strange thing in the Jewish kids growing up in America. But they had not asked those questions. And they oftentimes, it wasn't until their early 20s, they said, now, hold on, what is this Jewish thing anyway? Why does it mean something to me? Especially, I don't keep kosher. I don't dress like a Jewish person. I don't even, like those foods. I don't even want to marry somebody Jewish. What is my Jewishness?
Yeah, right. Well, that's so interesting. There's a guy in social sciences in the marriage education world, and he's going to be a guest on our show as well. His name is Dr. Scott Stanley. And the name of, Scott, and the name of his blog and the name of one of his major propositions in his academic world is sliding versus deciding. So he takes it into the realm of premarital, of living together, like, well, we've been together for 5 years. I guess we should have a kid. We've been together for 17 years. I guess we should buy a house. It's sort of just like not conscious. It's just like, well, here you are, we might as well have a child, as opposed to deciding, yes, you are the person that I want to have a family with. Yes, you are the person that I want to set up a home with. Yes. So that whole concept, and how much rockier relationships are when people are just kind of not paying attention and just sliding into kind of things like letting the river just roll where it's going to roll.
You know what though, Wendy? I think people kind of slide into all sorts of life decisions.
True.
And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because it
takes away from where we're going. But
I'm just pointing out that people slide into life decisions all the time, and that's my role as a life coach, is to help them figure out how to live life with purpose.
Take a pause and live on purpose.
Yeah. Anyway.
I say it's a classic thing that happens with these couples. And I was thinking that's one of the problems these couples is they do slide into things. They don't ask the questions. They assume it'll be okay rather than taking a proactive approach to it. And they also assume that the ease they have in their interfaith, their intercultural relationship dating is going to keep on going. And you realize that dating's like the easiest stage. There's usually 4 classic stages. They have this stage when they're dating and they think, ooh, our differences are so neat and interesting.
Yeah.
We just love it and we're just so in love. It'll be great. Then they come to the second stage, which is when they have the first major conflict and they realize you're going to have a wedding. And suddenly they realize they actually come from 2 different families with very different expectations, and they have to really put their stick down as to what's this going to look like and how we're going to do this. And suddenly there's all this fighting, and they think, oh, well, if I could just get past the wedding day, it'll all work. And then I realize the wedding day is actually a preview of the apocalypse, which is when you, you got to make much longer term decisions on these. One thing I recommend to couples, though, to be proactive about it, is they tend to get wrapped up in the sense, do I got to be Jewish or Christian? They in some ways are very reductionistic about it. And they don't understand, and they often will accuse each other of being, hypocrites for different reasons. Like say one couple where, he wants their son to be baptized. And she's like, but you don't care about being a part of church. You don't care about God. Why do you care about having to get baptized? You're being a hypocrite.
Yeah.
What's actually happening here is he doesn't even understand why it's important to him.
Right. Yeah.
But so what I help couples do is you got to break down the way you're going to live into 5 different kind of areas. I go in your first area, we talked earlier about identity. How do we want to think of ourselves as a couple? How do we want their kids to think of themselves? Half Jewish, half this, whatever it is, you got to think about that identity question.
Name it. Yep.
You need to make a communal decision. Your communal decision is where we're going to have community. Are we going to be in a church? Are we going to be in a synagogue? Are we going to be in nothing? Are we going to be twice a year here, 3 years here? But it's really a decision about community. And people often think that's the religious choice. Not necessarily. It's a communal choice. And you need to make a sort of what I call a home choice, which is the sort of traditions, rites of passage. What does December look like in your life and in your house?
Yes.
Well, that can even be different among different Christian couples. Do you wrap the Christmas presents or do you leave them open?
Wait, every couple's an intercultural exchange.
Yes.
And I go, then you're going to have to make a decision on how you're going to relate to your extended family, and how you're that's. How about their expectations? What are the choices we're going to make and how we're going to relate to them?
Right.
It's oftentimes, like they would recommend classically, if let's say a family decides to raise their kids Jewish, what about the family that's not Jewish? You want to say, well, I need to make sure, what are things really important to them that I can still do and be a part of their lives, even though we're not doing the entire life they want us to have. And then I think the 5th big area then is, sort of the transcendent one. Forget about all the religious labels and everything like that. What do you really believe about God? And what do you want that to look like in your family? Do you pray with your kids? Do you talk about it? Which really is not, people tend to package these things together. And then I go, if you're proactive or reactive, you're going to either way, you're going to make decisions in these 5 areas.
Right.
Far better to think about them, talk about what you value and how you're going to do it.
Yep.
Otherwise, it ends up being a lot of passive aggressive kind of stuff, and they end up with a lot of conflict rather than saying, let's decide about this. How do we want to think about this? And you talk about, I think within a marriage, it's going to be very fluid. You're going to adjust your decisions on how to do this. As your kids get older, they're going to want to get involved in different ways. But I think I really help couples to have these kind of conversations. To go back to the baptism discussion, right? It wasn't a communal decision because he didn't want to be part of a church. It wasn't a transcendent decision. It had nothing to do with his so-called faith.
Right.
But it had everything to do about sort of a sense of identity. I want my child to be like me.
Okay.
There was a sense of pressure from the families. This is very important to his family, how he's going to relate to them. And ultimately, it was what you're going to do with the rites of passage is an active decision every couple needs to make. So it was actually it was operating in 3 of those areas, but not the 2 she was assuming it was.
Fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's a really great model to just bring forward to all of the conversations you have with people pre-marital counseling or when conflicts come up. You just kind of overlay those 5 steps and help bubble that up to the surface. I imagine it's a really great way to say, that's what that is, you've highlighted it for us.
For instance, one of the exercises I give them, because at first they kind of look at that and go, my gosh, I don't even understand. I'm not even thinking that deep on these levels. So I give them a worksheet called I call it the December dilemma, and Hanukkah or Christmas and that kind of thing. And one reason it's a good place to start is because it's kind of a fun one, and in some ways it's easier and less, less difficult, especially before they have kids. But I ask them, so I asked a number of questions. What was and spend a lot of time thinking to yourself, what was your December like growing up? What were the pieces that were particularly meaningful to you that you want your kids to experience? Now try to ask yourself why they meant something to you. Was it because of the family connection? Was it because of the spiritual effect on you? Sometimes takes people a while going, why was that so important to me? Were there things were there things other families had that you wish you had? That kind of a thing. And then as they talk to one another about those things, now begin to work, what would your December look as a family that could, in some ways, cherry pick the things that were really important to you? Because what a couple will classically do is they'll think, or even for a wedding, they'll think, I need to stick in Jewish stuff, I need to stick in Christian stuff. And I'm like, don't think in those terms. Think about it in terms of what actually means something to you and your family. Well, what things will people find important and have, because that'll get them satisfied. Like, for instance, let me give you want a wedding example?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Classically, couples don't get that Jewish weddings are all about aesthetics. It's all about the sights and the sounds. It's about seeing the chuppah, hearing the glass, hearing the Hebrew sung. Content's irrelevant. I mean, it sounds bad, but it's just not. The content's not that big of a deal. It's all this sort of aesthetics.
Okay.
Oftentimes Christian weddings, depending on the traditions, are much more about content.
Yeah.
They're much more about hearing about what's being said. They want to understand the vows and what are we thinking, weddings mean, and some of the lingo. And so it's actually not so hard to combine them. You can combine enough aesthetic, you can combine the sort of meaning and, what is the content aspect of a Christian one with some of the aesthetics of the Jewish one. And the Christian one looks at the aesthetics of the Jewish one and goes, oh, that's beautiful. And the Jewish one looks at the content of the Christian one and says, oh, that was really powerful.
Yeah.
How powerful and interesting. And then everyone walks away going, oh, what a beautiful ceremony.
Yeah. Okay. That's great.
But they don't get it because they're trying to almost like cherry pick traditions or just trying to pick like, oh, well, if we're doing a Jewish wedding, we have to have this and this. I'm like, not necessarily. I mean, circling the bride, it's a Jewish tradition. Does it mean anything to your family? Well, ask your folks. Go have a conversation with them. They're like, nah, we don't care about that. I don't even know about that tradition. Include it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
Wow, that helps bring things out.
And you're talking about rites of passage. I'm thinking of one friend of mine from college in particular, but I mean, I know of families where one person is raised Catholic, and the other's raised Protestant.
Oh my gosh!
And that's a problem.
Yep.
And I had a friend from college she had 2 boys and then a girl, and her husband really wanted the kids to be raised Catholic. So she was like, okay, fine. Boys were baptized Catholic. Came time to baptize her daughter. She really struggled with baptizing her in the Catholic Church. And I won't get into all the reasons why. That's not the purpose of this, but just to say that these rites of passage are really powerful, and they can't.
Well, I think the key piece there is that maybe she doesn't understand why it upset her so much.
Oh, she knew, because her grandfather was a Protestant minister. She knew exactly why it upset her.
But these deep strands of identity.
Yeah.
Like it's shook by various things. I had a couple come to me, and they were having a conflict over. How to raise their daughter. He was from a Christian background, she was Jewish background. He goes, so they go to church, and she says openly, I'm an atheist. I'm an absolute atheist. It's not a big deal, but I just don't believe anything. Mm-hmm. And then they're talking about their experience in church, and he's saying, we believe in, one God, not 3 gods. And he says, but you're an atheist. Right? And he thinks she's being like a hypocrite, but she doesn't realize that even the statement of belief actually was more of a, identity marker.
Okay.
It was more the boundaries of how she thought about herself.
Right.
You know, even coming in there and talking about Jesus, especially for say a Jewish person who goes, well, let's see, what makes you Jewish? Well, I don't keep culture. I don't keep kosher. I don't go to synagogue. I didn't marry somebody Jewish. They're like, well, the only thing I got is, I guess I'm not a Jesus person. You know, and they go, then someone says,
so it's a negative. Yeah. It's not a step up.
Identify that themselves. But what happens is when they begin to think about Jesus, then they suddenly jump back.
Yeah.
And they don't understand why they did. Or they begin to act in sort of aggressive ways, not really being able to identify it. Yeah. And it's kind of one of the strange ways it works. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's sort of like we come with a lot of historical things that we don't even name. Yeah. We don't even know from.
They're subconscious.
Yeah, they're very subconscious. It's very, very interesting.
And you know, to broaden this beyond religion though too. I mean, how many couples do we know where somebody comes from, say, Central America, and somebody else comes either from the U.S. or from Europe or something like that, or even Europe and the U.S. I mean, there's just a lot of talk. We're just about out of time, but have you worked with couples that have dealt with those kinds of cultural shifts and problems?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. Well, one funny one is I had one where the couple was saying, you know, it upsets me because you're always arguing with your dad. You're always fighting with your dad on the phone. And he's going, I never fight with my dad on the phone. What are you talking about? You always fight with your dad on the phone. And after you write down, I suggested to them, you know, his dad was Israeli. That Israeli culture is a very aggressive sort of arguing culture. And actually in that culture, the arguing is a signal of interest. If you don't, you know, arguing shows I care about your life. I'm interested in what's happening with it. I have my suggestions to add. If they didn't argue, it would be disinterest. And he did not perceive it as arguing. It's like his dad's almost showing his love and care through their argument. I know it sounds crazy.
Wow, that's a completely different lens.
Completely different, but she was able to then reinterpret that. And now when she heard them yelling on the phone, she kind of smiled because she realized that's actually
love.
Yeah. If they stopped arguing, that would mean my father-in-law doesn't care about our family.
Yeah, yeah.
But helping them to kind of reinterpret that stuff and climb into those cultural situations. Like you said, the farther, you know, Central America, any of those have huge differences.
Yes.
Right. Oh, yeah. Oh, we could just go down the list and name the things. You know, I was speaking with an Italian-American construction worker yesterday. He's a friend of mine, and I shared a joke with him. And he said to me, he goes, "You are the whitest girl I've ever met in my whole life." And I was like, ha ha ha, and because he was Italian American, doesn't look very different from me. And I got in my car, I was like, was he insulting me? Oh, is he just trying to say, Pat, you're so cute? I don't really know. So I came home and told my husband. He goes, was he insulting? I said, I don't really know, but I like the guy, and I don't think he was trying to insult me. But it's very interesting. Like, I don't know what was in my joke telling that was
culturally different.
That fell flat for him, because I'm a pretty good joke teller. But
one other interesting example I just thought of was I deal with folks oftentimes in Eastern cultures. You know, either could be India or the Far East, and those cultures value unity and community and family unity and community unity as an incredibly high value. And we often will look at it and say they're not being honest, but they don't understand what their value is. Unity. For instance, you walk into a room in that Western culture, and there's a vase on the floor.
A what?
Like say a vase is broken on the floor. They'll say, oh, the vase is broken. But you walk into a room in an American culture and you see the vase broke on the floor, and you say, who broke
it? What happened?
No, we say, who broke the vase?
Yeah,
It's American culture to pin the tail on the donkey. You know, we want to establish blame, which is actually very threatening to unity.
It is.
So that's why in an Asian culture, there's the idea of saving face. There's the idea of, but they understand it's not that they're not being honest about it. It's the idea that we don't like to do things which create division within our family, within our community, which could shame someone and make them feel distance.
Interesting.
Won't mention things.
Right.
And a lot of other cultures aren't like that at all. You know, I have these Jewish Asian ones. Jewish cultures are not like that at all. Jewish culture is a guilt culture.
Yeah.
That means you say whatever you want, and then you feel really bad about it after. And a guilt culture is totally different than a shame culture. A shame culture is all about what's made visible and what's seen. And so you got to, and so oftentimes in a Jewish culture, it's like, well, why is no one talking to me here? You know, why am I not hearing what you're upset about?
Interesting. Speaking of shame, I commend the book by Brene Brown. Do you know it?
Which one?
Yeah, we need to go.
Right.
Brene Brown. Look her up. She does some. She's a social scientist working with shame, shame, and
authenticity. Fantastic. Yeah.
And open-hearted. No, generous-heartedness, something like that. But. So Garrett, thank you so much for joining us. The takeaways that I'm going to take away is that wonderful way of kind of exposing some things that are kind of an undercurrent, is looking at our identity critically or with some purpose. Mm-hmm. So these 5 steps that you've given us are just great for us to take away and help our listeners with that. And so tell us, what's a project you're working on currently? Where can we find you online?
Well, for the rites of passage and counseling stuff, I have a GarrettRSmith.com.
Okay.
And I do have my book, Comfortably Jewish.
Yep.
I actually have an article that was published in Moral Relativism on shalom, the key, or commitment, the key to finding shalom in a marriage.
Oh, great.
I recommend to anybody.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. And
I have my Thinking Faith. That's right.
Yes, you do.
thinkingfaith.org, where I have a lot of sort of, I call, pastoral thoughts or, faith struggle. It's quick 2-minute videos, 3-minute videos on faith issues.
Yeah, you do a great job with that.
Perfect.
Well, thank you very much. Mighty Married Moms is all the better for having you join us today and give us a great way to.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And maybe you can come back again and talk some more with us.
Yeah.
Love to.
That'd be great. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. This is the end of our conversation today with Dr. Smith. And please, again, subscribe on iTunes to Mighty Married Moms and find us on mightymarriedmoms.com. And we'll see you on Thursday. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Mighty Married Moms. Tune in twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays to meet fascinating and inspiring guests who will help you create the life you've always wanted.
You can find these episodes and special gifts just for you at mightymarriedmoms.com, as well as a link to our Facebook community,
where we continue the conversation around the kitchen table. Please also help share the love by leaving a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.